Yong was completely terrified. Fear ran through his body, and despite his attempts to stay calm, he didn't know what to do in this situation. His hands shook slightly, and his breathing was somewhat irregular. Everything around him felt too tense, and uncertainty clouded his thoughts. Suddenly, Seoyin, with a smile that seemed full of confidence, indicated that he should remove his clothes so they could enjoy themselves, she said with a softness that contrasted with Yong's internal chaos. But just before he began undressing, Seoyin, with slow assured movements, approached him and started touching him. Her hands were warm, and the simple touch made Yong's body tense up even more. Gently, Seoyin asked him to lie down. Her voice was calm, as if there was no rush at all. Then, with an almost playful smile, she asked him to open his legs slightly so she could get more comfortable. Yong was bewildered, completely out of sorts, and the blush on his face was unmistakable. He couldn't believe what was happening. In front of him was his teacher, the woman everyone on campus considered a goddess, unattainable. Yet there she was, above him in a way he'd never imagined. Seoyin was taken aback by Yong's unexpected response. Despite his nerves, he seemed to have an energy about him that surprised her. It was something she hadn't anticipated, and the realization made her feel a bit embarrassed. "Absolutely not," Yong blurted out, his voice firm yet tinged with emotion, as if trying to make sure there was no confusion about how he truly felt. Before he could even stop himself, he added, "I think you're beautiful." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Seoyin's cheeks flushed bright red at the sincerity of his words. His honesty completely caught her off guard, and despite her usual calm demeanor, she couldn't help but show her blush. Wanting to return some of the sweetness he had shown her, Seoyin, without thinking, gently stroked his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her shy smile barely hiding her flustered state. Yong, on the other hand, was still overwhelmed with embarrassment. He wasn't sure how to respond, still processing the vulnerability of the moment. As Seoyin's touch continued, he felt a bit out of place, noticing how naturally she seemed to take charge, guiding things forward without needing to say much more. They both settled into the quiet connection, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. Slowly, the tension between them melted away, and they simply shared the peace of the night, as if time had slowed and the world outside didn't matter. Back in her room, hours later, Yuna lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the thoughts of Jason from her mind, especially wondering why he hadn't come back yet, considering how late it was. Far from her, Jason's driver was walking the streets, his search for him becoming more urgent by the minute. The driver had been pacing back and forth, eyes scanning the area, hoping to catch sight of Jason at any moment. But nothing. Frustration was starting to creep in as he moved closer to a line of parked cars. Maybe Jason was near one of them, caught up in something, or just hanging around. The sheer number of cars made it difficult to pinpoint where he might be, but the driver wasn't ready to give up just yet. He kept going, determined to find him. Suddenly, something caught his attention. A strange sound broke the night silence. He focused his hearing, and when he turned his head, he saw one of the parked cars moving unexpectedly. The scene left the driver feeling uneasy, but he pushed the discomfort aside and decided to approach the situation carefully. He stepped closer to the vehicle and tapped on the window. "I'm the driver," he called out, waiting for a response. "I'm here to drive." But just as he was about to pull back, everything shifted. Out of nowhere, a pair of hands slammed against the window, making the driver jump with a start. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, fear completely froze him. He hadn't seen that coming, and his mind went blank. Then, faint muffled sounds began to seep through the car, soft but distinct enough to break the quiet of the night. The driver stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. With a frustrated sigh, he turned away, muttering curses under his breath. "How shameless can they be, doing that here?" he thought, clearly irritated. His patience was running thin. He couldn't believe Yong had dragged him into this situation. Hours dragged on, and eventually, the first rays of sunlight began to break through the horizon. Inside the car, Soyeon and Yong were still sound asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, completely drained after a long night spent together. "Miss Soyeon, Thank you so much for your kindness, Yang mumbled sleepily, his voice soft yet filled with genuine gratitude. The words came out almost reflexively, as if it was the most natural thing to say. But a small voice inside him whispered that it might not have been the best way to start the conversation. Sin, half awake, flashed him a playful smile and gently tapped his forehead. Don't you dare greet me like that, she teased, her tone carrying a hint of authority that slipped through despite her usual playful demeanor as a teacher. Yang, genuinely curious, tilted his head. Then how should I? He asked, intrigued by the little game she seemed to be playing. Leaning in slightly, Sun whispered in a soft but firm voice, you should tell me it was nice working out with me. Her words eased the tension, as if the entire night had been part of something shared between the two of them. It wasn't just an experience, it was their experience. Before pulling away, Soyeon gave him one last smile and a wink, signaling that everything between them should stay between them. No need for words, but the unspoken message was crystal clear. What had happened was a secret, and it would stay that way. Yang, still processing everything, wasn't sure how to react. It was his first time in a situation like this, and his mind was still trying to piece it all together. Later, back at home, Yang knelt before Yuna, his hand raised in surrender. Yuna, frowning in frustration, stood over him, clearly upset by his lack of communication. What were you doing yesterday, to be coming back at this hour? She demanded, her voice thick with disapproval. Yang felt a knot form in his stomach. He struggled to find the right words to explain himself. How could he possibly tell his aunt that he had to keep his teacher's secret? He couldn't. But lying to her didn't sit right, either. The weight of the situation felt suffocating, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to move forward. Yuna continued to reprimand him, her tone firm and unwavering, showing no signs of letting up. Meanwhile, Neon, watching from the side, couldn't hide the satisfaction on her face. She seemed to take pleasure in seeing Jason squirm, struggling to justify his actions. Jong fumbled for words, his mind still spinning with the memories of the night before, leaving him speechless once again. His face flushed, the heat rising as his cheeks turned pink, betraying the thoughts swirling in his head. Unable to maintain eye contact with Yuna, he quickly turned his head to the side, trying to avoid the sharpness of her gaze. Can Jong, put those arms down, Yuna said with a sigh, clearly trying to keep her patience intact. Look, I know you're not one to do anything foolish when you go out, so I won't pressure you any further. But if you're not coming back on time, at least send me a message. Jong felt a mixture of relief and guilt wash over him. He regretted making her worry, and in a quiet, apologetic voice, he promised to text her next time. Yuna, now calmer, nodded and offered him a small, understanding smile. All right, I'll stop scolding you, she said, her tone softening. But from now on, let's keep in better communication, okay? Seeing the understanding in her eyes, Jong felt the tension in his shoulders slowly fade, and a smile of gratitude appeared on his face. Have you eaten breakfast? Yuna asked, her voice laced with concern, as if she couldn't help but check in on him after everything. When Jong shook his head, Yuna didn't hesitate for a moment. She made her way to the kitchen, determined to prepare something for him. I made some ramen this morning. Would you like to try it? She offered, setting a steaming bowl in front of him. The rich aroma filled the room, though the smell was a little stronger than usual. Turning toward her daughter, who was standing in the doorway watching the scene, Yuna asked, Would you like some too? But her daughter quickly stepped aside, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of eating her mother's cooking. Without giving it much thought, Jong picked up the chopsticks and took a bite of the ramen. The moment it hit his taste buds, something felt off. It was a strange, unpleasant taste, and he couldn't hide his reaction. His face scrunched up, and before he could stop himself, he jumped up from the table, startling Yuna, who blinked in surprise. Would you like us to cook together? He asked, offering a smile that, while friendly, didn't quite mask the hint of dissatisfaction with the taste. He quickly tried to smooth over the awkwardness, not wanting to hurt Yuna's feelings. Rolling up his sleeves, he explained, I think the ramen turned out a bit odd, maybe because you were distracted watching videos on your phone while cooking? Yuna laughed, the sound light and genuine, clearly enjoying the moment. Curiously, she asked, Did your mom teach you to cook? She was surprised to see him handling the kitchen so confidently. Jang shook his head with a calm smile, explaining that he had learned to cook on his own. He had always thought that, someday, when he was living on his own, he'd want to be able to prepare his own meals. Once they were done cooking, Yang served Yuna a portion of what he had prepared. With a satisfied expression, he asked, "Do you want to try it?" Yuna took a spoonful, and the moment the flavor touched her tongue, a broad smile spread across her face. It was the first time she had tasted something so delicious, and she couldn't hide her joy. Her eyes sparkled, and she let out a delighted giggle, savoring every bite. "This is delicious," she exclaimed, practically glowing with happiness. "I don't know how you did it, but this tastes completely different from what I made. Much better." With a knowing smile, Yuna stepped closer to Yang, her voice soft and tender. "Did you know that Neon has been happier since you arrived?" she whispered. "I'm so grateful that the house feels so full of life now, thanks to you." Her expression softened, and she gently took Jason's hand in hers. "Jason, thank you so much for coming to live here. You've really made us so happy," she said, her eyes warm and sincere. The young man felt his cheeks flush, a wave of warmth spreading through him at the contact of Yuna's hand. He wasn't quite sure how to respond, feeling both grateful and a bit overwhelmed by her kindness. What neither of them knew, though, was that from behind the door, Neon had been quietly listening to their entire conversation. She was quietly spying, a soft smile playing on her lips as she enjoyed watching them interact, soaking in the warmth of their closeness. They had been so caught up in their exchange that they hadn't noticed the kettle still simmering on the stove. Thick steam began to rise from it, filling the kitchen with a growing cloud of vapor. Yuna quickly realized the kettle had been forgotten, and in her hurry to remove it, she accidentally burned her hand, letting out a small yelp of pain. "Ouch!" she exclaimed, jerking her hand back, while Yang's face flashed with concern, clearly startled by the sudden mishap. In her panic, Yuna lost her balance and began to fall toward the floor, but Yang, reacting instinctively, rushed forward and managed to cushion her fall just in time. They both ended up on the floor, breathing a sigh of relief that the situation hadn't turned worse. However, during the fall, as Yang tried to catch her, he accidentally grabbed her chest. Both of them froze for a moment, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Yuna, realizing where his hands had landed, stammered, her mind racing. She couldn't quite believe what was going on, and though she tried to collect her thoughts, no words seemed to come out. Her face flushed a deep crimson, the heat spreading from her neck to her cheeks as embarrassment washed over her. Yang, equally overwhelmed, seemed just as stunned, though Yuna was the one who felt her heart pounding in her chest. It was an awkward silence, with Yang still holding on to her, albeit unintentionally, and both of them caught in the clumsiness of the moment.